Welcome to Unlocking Moves, where we're going to cover the key decision points and pivotal moments that really change the trajectory of successful entrepreneurs and leaders. We want to share stories, not just the glory stories, but also the gory stories. Because as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. Of stories, my guest today is my good friend Scott Jensen. And Scott, I know you've got a ton of stories from your life working with legendary Texas barbecuer Stubb, CB Stubblefield. I know that, in fact, I want to start back in the beginning. Back in 1990, you're just a schmuck at Georgia Pacific in the marketing department. Somehow you and a couple of other friends partnered with this Texas legendary barbecuer Stubb. How the hell did that come about?
That is definitely a fork in the road where you choose one side or the other. And, I'd gotten my MBA in NYU, started working for this big company. It was Dixie cups, Dixie plates, Brawny paper towels, like big consumer products, $7 billion a year company. I think it's part of International Paper now, but, it had changed hands a couple times. And I'd gone to school at SMU in Dallas, undergraduate, and met some folks that had gone to University of Texas and Baylor, and you kind of like move around the state when you go to school in Texas. Had eaten barbecue at Stubb's restaurant in Austin a couple times when I came down there. But while I was getting my MBA at NYU, one of my roommates was a gentleman named John Scott, and there was another guy from Lubbock named Eddie Patterson. And while we were all in New York City, Stubb no longer had his restaurant in Austin and was reaching out to like borrow money to pay his rent. True story. We scrambled up a little bit of money, sent, I think it was $1,400 down to him. And about 4 or 5 months later, he sent up hot barbecue in a cooler. Before 9/11, you could go counter to counter, like go into American Airlines in Austin and ship something hot. And the next flight, you would pick it up at the counter. And so he sent us some barbecue and we fell in love with it. All of our friends fell in love with it. So we started writing a business plan. I then went to work on Dixie cups and Dixie plates for 2 years and was interviewing to take a job at Pepsi when one of my friends in Dallas said, I'm going to give you guys your first $250,000, but you have to move down to Texas to run the Stubb's barbecue sauce company. So that's when Eddie and John and I made our plans. Eddie and I came first. John came 9 months later, and we moved down to Austin and started the barbecue sauce company with Stubb.
Holy smokes. That is awesome. And I want to get into that part of the story because I know that's got to be part of your unlocking moves. But you did, and I know you very well, so I know the generosity of your heart. And I know that giving to somebody without any expectations is part of who you are. But you basically, with your friends, gave $1,400 to this guy, and out of it became your career because you went from PepsiCo to running Stubb's barbecue sauce.
Stubb's barbecue, yeah. And when you're young, you're a little blind too, and you've got a lot less risk. No wife and kids, and so you're able to kind of stretch into things that sane people are, warning you against. My dad was like, what are you doing? You're on a great career track. Put another 2 inches with PepsiCo on your resume and you'll be the greatest guy ever. And some people go that route. I went the other route. And to come down, we didn't raise a lot of money. So Eddie and I lived together in the same house with one of our investors in the empty rooms. Stubb would come by a couple times a week and bring over some barbecue sauce that he just made in the small little kitchen. And the excitement of it was also part of it. The generosity. Stubb by himself led by example. He went out of business at his restaurants twice, and kind of both of them were like not paying bills, the IRS or other things, payroll taxes. But things would always come back to him like twofold. And so you learn by example. When someone's so successful, everyone loved him. We knew if all we could do was cook barbecue and pour the sauce on it and give it to people, find a way to put it in their mouth, that it would become a business. And it did. It became a big business that we eventually sold to McCormick Spice Company.
That's awesome. So, guys, you're just joining me. My good friend Scott Jensen is joining us here on Unlocking Moves. Scott is now the CEO of Rhythm Superfoods. And before that, as you heard, he was the co-founder and ultimately CEO of Stubb's legendary barbecue, which sold to McCormick about 6 or 8 years ago, if I remember correctly. And such an amazing run. 10 days bleed together at this point for me, man. And he's also, I'll call him the godfather of CPG here in Austin. So many people go to him for advice. He's such a great mentor and counselor and coach in the CPG community. Scott, thanks so much for joining me on Unlocking Moves.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Can't wait to give you more little zingers.
If you're just joining us on Unlocking Moves, today's episode is brought to you as usual by HireBetter, the strategic talent partner for growth-minded entrepreneurs everywhere. So, first of all, the picture behind you has Rhythm Superfoods. It also has Mexican wrestling. I forget what that's called, but we might get into that a little bit too. But tell me the story on Rhythm, because Rhythm Superfoods is a superfood snack company, far cry from barbecue sauce. Tell me a little bit about that, how it came about.
Yeah, well, first of all, we are now in Mexico with our own production facilities that are right in the middle of the biggest agricultural zone in North America. So within an hour of us, every fruit or vegetable that you'll find in supermarkets right now in the spring and winter, it's all grown down there because it's cold up in the US. So the pop culture of Mexico and the history of it has the luchadors, and that's why that stuff is behind me. But when we were doing the barbecue sauce company, Stubbs was not in Whole Foods, and Whole Foods was headquartered right here in Austin. And, we were using national branded ingredients like Lee and Perrin's Worcestershire sauce or French's mustard or, big, large branded ingredients to make our barbecue sauces. And I'm not, there was a couple of ingredients in there that had like sub ingredients that weren't allowed by Whole Foods, like sodium benzoate or sulfites or something like that. And so that kept us out of the largest supermarket chain within the Central Texas region outside of HEB. So got a little curious, like, why aren't we able to get in there and what's going on in this natural organic space, and went to my first Expo West, which is the Natural Products Expo West show, which is where all the natural products, at that time, it was much smaller than it is now, but Tom's toothpaste and, all these great ecologically safe cleaning products, they were all building a big segment of what would then be the next food and beverage growth story in America and CPG. So I went there, I was blown away. There was so much energy, so much activity, and all these natural food stores were growing like weeds. Whole Foods being the biggest one, acquiring other companies, but we still weren't in there. So we had to challenge ourselves to say, well, can we make the same recipe using organic or natural ingredients? And so we actually did. We didn't realize that these ingredient suppliers had the exact same, say, Worcestershire sauce, but didn't have sulfite in it. You just had to ask them, shame on us for not knowing, but we ended up making the Stubbs sauce, the same recipe, but natural. And that had me curious about what my next step would be, what next stage. You kind of get good at what you do when you're in an industry for as long as we were. And I wanted to jump into the natural organic side. So when my term was ending, leading Stubbs Barbecue, I was really excited about jumping into the natural organic side of the business. And through a couple of other friends and what I'll call co-founders now, because they started the business with me, I was introduced to some people that were making kale chips in a small dehydrator in the back of a juice bar. And that was what brought me into it. I was like, can we commercialize something as healthy as a kale chip, but make it as delicious as a Dorito, if you will? So that was always the brass ring. What can we do to make something in the snack world delicious, shelf stable, but also really good for you? That's what we're always trying to do every day at Rhythm.
Well, I know it's been a tremendous journey, a long journey, and you've had a lot of lessons along the way. I will vouch for the kale chips. They are delicious. Even my kids will eat them, although my wife won't touch them. But now you've got things like carrot sticks and cauliflower, which is selling like hotcakes, as I understand, beet chips, which is an acquired taste, but I actually love them. Tell me a little bit about what your product roadmap is for Rhythm.
We're pretty disciplined about trying to maintain high nutrient density, and that's difficult when you're talking snacks. But almost everything we make is coming from a farm that's an hour or two away. So if we're using fresh, organic, or when you can't get organic, just really good nutritional vegetables, you start with something that on the nutrition fact panel on the back of the label, there's vitamins and phytonutrients and fiber and hopefully a little bit of protein. So we start with a good vegetable, and then depending on the 3 or 4 different technologies we have, we try to find the best expression of that particular fruit or vegetable, like nutritionally. You can't always do the same thing. We have some vacuum popping stuff that once we put a product in there, it just doesn't come out right. Some things we put in a dehydrator and it gets too hard. So if you visited our plant in Guadalajara, we're right in smack dab in the middle of this big produce area, but it's like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. There's all kinds of unusual, interesting equipment, but not everything needs to be made like a potato chip. So you have to have these unusual technologies to make something crunchy and palatable and shelf stable and delicious. So that's kind of what we do, is look to the future. Like, where are people going culinary wise? Like, by the time you'll hear this, you'll probably be only a month away from some of our great retailers like Whole Foods and Kroger and Costco having our shishito peppers, which are a crunchy pepper that typically you have blistered at a Japanese restaurant as an appetizer, but we're taking it and making it into a crunchy snack. We're taking jicama, which is a great Mexican kind of snack, usually eaten fresh, and we're crunchifying that and putting some tahini, chili lime seasoning on it. We've got 3 vegetables in a mixed bag. So we're always trying to figure out, one, is it nutritionally dense? Is it healthy for people? And then 2, is it unique enough so that we're not just a Me Too product? If you're in this business, the worst thing you can do is go to a buyer at a supermarket and say, hey, I've got the 9th potato chip brand that I'd like to put on your shelf. There's no space for it unless you have something incredibly unique. So the hard part is pulling things out of the ground at a farm and turning them into something that's unique and delicious that the consumers will ultimately buy several times over and over again.
Well, I know they're unique. I know they're not fried. I know they're very good for you, and it's a great way to get your veggies, that's for sure. So thank you for that. Hey, while I've got you, so one of the things we want to do is talk about some of the, frankly, the shit shows that we have on our way to success. Can you share with me one of the biggest challenges you guys have had at Rhythm, and maybe either how you overcame it or frankly how you didn't overcome it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you learn along the way. By no means did we know anything when we started the Stubb's barbecue sauce company. We thought we would march into Walmart or HEB and the buyer would say, "Oh, we love it. Come on in." We didn't know the friction between getting a meeting and getting on the shelf. And so you learn as you go in an industry. And for us, when we first started Rhythm Superfoods, first of all, we were making it ourselves with small dehydrators, the Kale chips, right here in Austin. And so we were buying produce from a distributor. And then you get to a certain point where you're making so much of it, and you then have to start thinking about margin as you're scaling your business. The early stages of, is this going to work or not? It's okay to fumble. It's okay to be high priced, high cost. But ultimately, to have a sustainable business, it's got to be able to scale. And that means being able to make more and make more for less, so you can make it for a price that's palatable to the consumers. And we struggled in the US because there's times of the year where you just can't get the vegetables from the US. And we were making, there were truckloads of kale that had to be delivered in the early days, 2 or 3 times a week, a truckload. And when it's no longer able to be grown in the US, then you're trying to get it from someone elsewhere, which is in Mexico. So once we found that, like, the distribution and the farming, the organic farmers down in Mexico were basically supplying all of the United States, all of their organic produce for about 5 or 6 months of the year. We're like, well, it's cheaper. We don't have to ship it for $5,000, 3,000 miles. That seems like a better place to go to make it. Let's be really close to where the farms are. And so that scalability of being able to partner with someone to build a brand new plant right next to where the farms are, where we were able to take advantage of, it's picked one day and it's in our plant the next day. We weren't getting our produce for 6 or 7 or 8 days when we were trucking it 3,000 miles and across Mexican US border. So that that was a problem. There were many days where we would open our plant up in the morning expecting a truckload of kale to come, and it didn't come, and it didn't come, and it didn't come because it was stopped at the border. You've got 35 full-time workers that are sitting there twiddling their thumbs, right? That's not good for cost of goods. So the shit show is when you get to scale, being really close to where you're the majority. If you're in the business of making cereal, you don't open a plant in Florida. You open a plant where the oats are grown, or the corn is grown, or the rice is grown, because all that distribution of the raw material costs a lot of money, and you're ultimately, successful or not successful based on how your product's going to do in the eyes of the consumer. And price is one of them. And you better be able to make margin. The only way to do that is getting the price of what it costs to make it down at an acceptable level to charge an acceptable price to the retailer that keeps you in business.
Man, Scott, I've learned three things just in the last 5 minutes. Number one is you might make mistakes, or you will make mistakes along the way. You didn't open your plant in Mexico from day one. You started and iterated. The second thing is we're in a margin business, and there's pennies that turn into dollars, which turn into margin, which turn into a successful business. So just the shipping fact alone is lost on a lot of consumers about how a company like yours is run. And then the first thing I wanted to come back to, when you first started your segment about how you started a company and your dad said, "What the hell are you doing?" The advice to all entrepreneurs out there is do stupid shit. Do take risks. You're going to do things that are uncomfortable for other people. So that's my encouragement to you. Hey, Scott, I consider myself the listener's advocate, and I want to ask the question that if I'm interviewing Scott Jensen, who is a successful entrepreneur, he also had an amazing run at Stubb's barbecue, sauce, and restaurant. You guys were a live music venue. You've got it over the 20 or so years you were there on site. You've got some great stories about musicians that came in. Can you share with me something that would touch the heart of my viewers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the first time we had kind of a big band show up, it was George Clinton and the P-Funk All-Stars, and from the old band Parliament. And not everyone may know them, but Flashlight is one of his big songs there. That was a big hit. And we were just a gravel ditch in the back with a small stage there when we first started out. And we'd never really, we didn't even have the right contracts. We didn't have like the riders that I want green M&Ms only in my room. So we stumbled there too, and didn't really, we didn't know how to close the show. So I just remember George's manager basically coming out and saying, like, we need the rest of the money. In this business, you're usually wiring half of the money as a guarantee up front. And then there's ticket sales the day of the show and all that kind of stuff. And we didn't kind of know that. We didn't know we had to have like either a cashier's check for the other half. We still had people waiting outside, to buy 400 or 500 tickets and get in, because there was no like Ticketmaster kind of thing going on back then that we were a part of. So we didn't have enough cash. Like, we had cash at the cash registers of the bars, but we needed to get people to buy their tickets and get in to get enough cash to get the money. So we were a little delayed getting the lead on band and the P-Funk All-Stars on the stage, simply because we didn't know that we had to pay them the second half. I'd say another one is waiting for Snoop Dogg.
Hey, wait, real quick. Hey, pause. Hold that thought for a second, because I'm envisioning you grabbing the money from the front gate, running back to the band to hand them, deliver them a boatload of $5 bills.
It was literally our bar backs that were taking tip jars and keeping track of what was in them, putting them into 5-gallon buckets, running them down to the office, and then we're counting it out like dollar bill by dollar bill to get whatever it was, $15,000 or $20,000 for the other half of the guarantee. It literally happened that way. And then finally, it was just Snoop Dogg. Was always special in our heart. He's an awesome performer, but he didn't like to go on early. And so, you have a crowd that's sold out. They paid a lot of money to see him. And he's back at the Four Seasons having fun, and supposed to go on at 9 and doesn't show up till 10:30, but there's a sound ordinance that you have to be down certain decibels by 10:30. And so he goes up on stage and he does about a 20-25 minute, set, which everyone had paid a lot of money to see, maybe more of him. But that was all he wanted to perform. And so he kind of told the audience that he was being asked to leave the stage, which we weren't asking him to leave the stage, but everyone like surrounded, like, all right, Snoop Dogg, we love you. It's just one of those moments where you weren't sure whether the crowd was going to riot or they were excited because they had just 25 minutes of Snoop Dogg. And luckily it was the latter, where it's like, didn't matter that he didn't do the full hour set. They were just so excited to have seen him play that the thing was over.
That's awesome. I'm so glad I asked you those questions because I love seeing your face light up talking about some of these artists. So let me ask you one more question around the whole Stubbs scene. And it's really a curiosity question for me. So you guys started this basically out of your apartment and cars or whatever, 1991-ish. And Stubb is asked to be on the David Letterman show around that time. So you guys are a pissant little company in Austin, Texas. You've got your founder, who is an iconic figure, on the David Letterman show. That must have been pretty surreal. Tell me what that was like.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It's very special because, any kind of positive energy like that for when you've already committed to start a company, it's unbelievable. Joe Ely, local, Grammy Award winning, awesome guy from the Flatlanders in West Texas. He was from Lubbock. Stubb was from Lubbock. He and all the other Lubbock performers all knew Stubb and knew him real well. And I think Joe had just been on the Letterman show like 4 or 5 or 6 weeks earlier. And talking to some of the producers and, hey, you got any interesting folks we should have, come up from Texas. And it was Joe that told him, like, you really need to bring this guy Stubb. They were really close friends, like as close buddies as you can get. And they ended up calling Stubb and saying, why don't you come up and do a barbecue segment? And we still have that like video because it was so special, but like, 6'5" Stubb, 6'9" with his cowboy hat. And he comes on, they've got this big grill, smoke coming out of it. Stubb's putting ribs and brisket on it, with his hands grabbing the brisket and flipping it. And the repertoire between Letterman and Stubb was so genuine and so cool, but smoke was billowing out after the show ended because that was the last segment. The fire alarms did go off, not the sprinklers, fire alarms, because he was literally cooking, on charcoal on the David Letterman show. So got away with that. It ended up being kind of the energy that really put us over the top in the first couple of years by not only showing the video to retailers, but also showing some of our investors that wanted to see what we were capable of. And it was really just Stubb and Joe Ely that magic moment happened.
Awesome. I hear what I heard in there was connections. So he had a connection with Joe Ely that helped get him on Letterman, and just being your authentic self. And it's going to lead to positive things. So let me switch gears slightly. You know about the book that I wrote called Who's Your Mike? It's about the employees you're going to meet on your entrepreneurial journey. There's a number of characters in there, several employees that you've outgrown, several employees that you bring in from the outside to be the silver bullet, and they're really just full of crap and get you nowhere. And then, of course, some good employees that help you along your journey. Which ones resonated with you? Was it Mike? Was it Betty? Was it Pipeline Paul? And then I'd love maybe a quick snippet of one of your employee stories you'd be willing to share.
Yeah, well, I would say it's Mike, and it's definitely my Allison, who our CFO. Like, I'm a bit of the yin to her yang, and you are right. You company and start a company, you're going to have every single person you hire, you expect and you think that they're going to be the superstars that they may be. It's not until you're 6 to 12 months into it that the menu's been opened and food has been delivered and you get to decide whether the soup is good or not. So, Allison, is definitely my Mike. And when she first started here, she was a part-time person as kind of assistant controller because her kids were of the age where she needed to be dropping off and picking up. And so we had her for 4 hours a day. And CPA, from a big accounting firm, incredibly intelligent. But, once her kids then became of age to be able to take the bus home or whatever it was, we had lost our CFO, who took a great job up in Dallas. And I was like, are we going to look for someone? I'm like, ended up finding out that Allison was absolutely fully capable. Right now, what she does too is half CFO, half operations. I don't have the attention span for the things that she accomplishes. And she doesn't have some of the skills that I do. So the puzzle fits perfectly in terms of the teammate that you want. But I see a lot of people that don't have that person. And I talk to a lot of people. You and I are members of YPO. I've got a couple YPO friends that are like, oh my God, if I could just find the right this. And sometimes these people are very anal finance operation and they need the crazy professor that's going to think creatively. So to me, I was just on a SKU, I'm involved in the mentorship program there. I was just on a mentor meeting last week where I brought the link up. And so everyone's got to buy this book because you're going to go on a hiring sojourn that you should at least know and identify that there are very different types of people. And if things aren't working out, you need to make these adjustments pretty quickly, because someone that you think might only be just not pulling their weight, they're probably actually a real negative and are doing more damage than maybe just being a 60% involved employee. So congratulations on the book. I know that you sold a lot of them in the first month that you came out with them, and appreciate you doing that for the industry.
Well, I was going to say thank you for pimping out the book at the SKU thing the other day. My sales doubled from 2 to 4 books over that period, and I wondered how that happened. Seriously, I appreciate that, and I love Allison. She's fantastic. So, Scott, we're at the part of the show where it's really the piste resistance, if I said that correctly, although you'll say it better for me. And that is, we're here to talk about those unlocking moves. What is 1 or 2 key pivotal moments that really helped change the trajectory of your career? I'm sure we've already talked about a little bit of at least one of them. Would you share a little bit more for us?
The balance between starting that company with 2 partners, and then we added 2 other partners, Jeff Waffle and Charles Littell, when we opened the restaurant, versus kind of me being the guy carrying the football on Rhythm. The stress of just being the sole leader and the sole entrepreneur starting it is about 10 times harder than having, a co-founder or a couple of co-founders. I just remember the energy that if my energy was low, Eddie's energy was high. And if both of us were low, John Scott's was high. Like, to be able to bounce off the energy that it takes to sustain the kicks in the stomach you get as an entrepreneur, I feel like you got to have, a co-founder, like there's some people that are just absolutely brilliant people and they know how to do it alone. And that's all they can think about is managing it alone themselves. But I find, having done both of them, I wish I had done Rhythm with like 1 or 2 other people, like standing on to the left and right of me, like we did for Stubbs. It just helps you because there's a lot of stress as an entrepreneur.
I like that. Either misery loves company or it takes a team. One of the 2 concepts, right? As an entrepreneur, you have both. They have those ups and downs. Hey, Scott, I want to ask you, what is one question that that people never ask you, and either you wish they would ask you, or maybe frankly you're glad they don't ask you about the luchadors, for example?
I think one of the things that people are afraid to talk about is, like, I'll even say, like, starting out in a company. I have my own personal set of beliefs. Like, the big fear is like, how much should I be paying myself as an entrepreneur starting a business? I'm a CEO, but we're not even doing 100,000 in sales, and we've just started out, and I've got investors' money. And it's kind of one of those things like where people are afraid to ask, right? There's no book that tells you exactly how it should be done. There are definitely books that will tell you their opinions, just like my opinion, which I'll share. Clayton Christopher is a great CPG guy here in Austin too. He had kind of a framework for how he thought about it for, a company that was just starting out. And it helps in many different ways to think of it this way. It's like when you're first starting out, let's say you just left a job that you were making $150,000 a year. And because it's in your mind, you think you should be making $150,000 a year. The company needs that money, at a much higher capacity than you do. So he would always challenge, like myself as a co-founder of Rhythm Superfoods, like, what can you stay even on? What do you need to live on? If you've got a family, like, not where you're putting another $25,000 a year into your IRA, but like, what can you pay the bills on? Because the sweat equity needs to be earned. And if you're saying to people like, hey, I was making 150, but all I'm pulling right now is, $52,000 a year until we hit $1 million in sales, that makes investors feel like, oh, okay, this guy or gal isn't just trying to like take no risks. They want to see someone that's like jumped into the deep end and can't kind of turn back. Although we can always turn back and find another job, right? But you give a lot of confidence to the investing community if you're taking as much risk as that person that just brought their pen out and started writing a check. So I just say, like, try to get away from the fear of talking about it. You should be welcoming the question from an investor that says, and I've, very early on, especially, it's like a couple of our investors like, well, what's your salary? And I'm like, well, for the first 6 months, I'm not taking, I was lucky enough because we'd had a partial exit of Stubbs and we were getting ready to sell the company. I was like, I'm not taking a salary for the first 6 months. Then I'm going to take 48,000 until we hit this. And then I'm going to go here. And then, we'll have a comp committee, 3 years into this. And that makes the investors like feel super comfortable that you're on the risk, just like their check that they've just given you is on the risk. Like you're there to like make it happen no matter what.
I completely agree. As an investor, the last thing we want to do is fund your lifestyle that's perhaps extravagant or just, we want you to be in the boat with us, rolling up your sleeves and making dirt until we succeed. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So Scott, where can we find out more about you or about Rhythm or anything else you'd like to know about?
Although I'm not a big social media poster, I am on LinkedIn because there's a lot of consumer products people there. And so Scott G. Jensen, it's easy to search in the search function there. I'm also a mentor annually at SKU, www.sku.is. It's a big, accelerator program based out of here in Austin, Texas. And so if you're going to become, involved in the accelerator program, you'll find me there at some point. But connect with me at LinkedIn. That's where it's very businessy. I know it's a little bit wonky, but I'm not just a big poster on TikTok or Twitter, although I surf those for marketing reasons. You won't find me there posting much.
Well, I'm sure your wife and kids are glad you're not either because you're too old to be cool like TikTok. So,
but also like our website at Rhythm is www.rhythmsuperfoods.com.
And always great deals over at Rhythm Superfoods. And that SKU, SKU is how you spell that. SKU.is is the accelerator Scott was talking about. So, hey, Scott, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Thank you so much for joining me. For all of you viewers and listeners out there, please go to YouTube, like and subscribe, and wherever you consume your podcasts, check us out, give us a like and a review. We really appreciate you. Scott, again, thank you so much for joining me and being authentic.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Kurt.
If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.